I've had a lot of positive things to say about this Martin SN0144. In fact, last year in 2024, I described it as my favorite watch release from Aliexpress. But now that I've actually had this watch in my collection for a few months and that I've worn it a lot, what do I think about it now? Do I still think it should have been classed as my favorite Aliexpress watch release of 2024? Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches. And do I still think that this watch that I've now had in my collection for some time is my favorite San Martin watch? Is it my favorite Aliexpress watch? Is it the best release from Aliexpress of 2024? Well, I can certainly say right now, yes. Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a great design. It's an original design. It has a great movement. It is really well made. It has an amazing bracelet. And I think it is a rather incredible watch. But there is a bit of a hurdle. There is a hurdle for people to get over, and it was a hurdle for me to get over, and that is the price of this watch. This watch, albeit for what you get, is actually super cheap, being 525 Australian dollars. It is a price that, even though when you look at the watch, may feel not enough money, but it's enough money that you may consider thinking that is a lot of money for an Aliexpress watch. And if you're thinking that's a lot of money for an Aliexpress watch, it is, because there's lots of much more affordable watches on Aliexpress that are also very good that cost much less than this particular watch. And when I start spending this amount of money on any watch, I do always ask myself a question. I ask myself a question of what else could I buy for this money? And I start thinking about Seikos, I start thinking about second-hand Swiss watches. So which is why this video, I'm going to try and show this watch in as much detail as I can so that you can understand why I have the opinion of this is an incredible watch for this money. And on that note, I didn't have to spend quite that much myself personally, because San Martin were nice enough to give me a small discount when I purchased it, which is why you would have earlier seen that sponsored icon pop up. And it's also why I'm going to leave some links to the San Martin store and the affiliate link to Aliexpress from the store that I actually ended up buying this one from. But I want to show you this one in a lot more detail, and I want to start with it on my wrist, because as you look down on my wrist, you're going to see how thin this watch is. This is now the thinnest watch in my collection, and it is one of the reasons why this watch really does stand out to me. It is that on-wrist experience, and it has a lot to do with that thinness, because this watch is only 10.5 millimeters thin. It is 10.5 millimeters thin, partly because of that high beat Miyota movement that it uses. But the other dimensions do vary depending on which watch you decide to choose, because when this one came out, when I purchased it, there was only one choice. It was the 39 millimeter case. And it turns out that is the right size for me. But if it's a little bit too big, there's also a 36 millimeter version. And if it's a little bit too small, there's even a 42 millimeter version. And if the blue one for some reason doesn't stand out to you, which I would be surprised, because for some reason the blue really grabs my attention, but there's also a red and an orange version. But no matter which one you end up picking, if you decide to pick one, they come in the same packaging. They both come with 100 meters of water resistance, that high beat Miyota movement, and they cost 525 Australian dollars. But because I bought the 39 millimeter watch, it has these other set of dimensions as well. As I mentioned, it is 10.5 millimeters thick as well. It has a lug to lug of 46 millimeters, but it does have those male down turning end links, which effectively make it 50.3, but they curve down so much that you don't even really consider that sort of larger number. I still think around about 48 is probably a realistic thought process in regards to the size of this one. The lug width is 20 millimeters, and it does taper all the way down to 16, and sized to my 17 centimeter wrist, it's 128 grams. But who cares what size this watch or even how thin it is when you start looking at the dial of this one, because it is what certainly grabbed my attention first. And as I look at this dial, and I'm not saying that this is what it is, but this is my perception as I look at it, it looks like a piece of glass that has a textured 3D effect trapped within it. There is a depth of that blue color that then infuses out to a sort of a darker on the outside. There is a pattern that changes depending on what light hits it, and it just mesmerizes me. This is obviously trying to emulate a particular porcelain from China. That is what they are saying that it is, but for me, it's just beautiful. And it's really beautiful that it then changes depending on the light. And this is one of those dials that They could have almost left it completely bare and just had the hands, a little bit like a Moser or something, and it probably would look quite good, but they've put some stuff on there which probably makes it easier to read the time, including on the very outer edge of that dial is white printed minute tracks. There is a little bit of a white printing down to the 6 that says automatic 100 meters. The date is color matched to the dial, but the date number is printed on in white too. But then on top of that, we've got a very cool San Martin logo. And for some reason, some people don't tend to like this logo. But I guess we're not all going to like the same thing. I personally quite like it, especially this hex logo version. I think it looks quite good, and I think it looks good as an applied logo that they've chosen here. But then of course they've got the hour markers there. They are polished with loom inside it, and I do like how the loom then breaks up those polished markers. I think it looks quite good, just like it does also on the hands, because the hands are also polished with the loom inside it, and the loom is actually rather good. It's a BGW9 and it looks delicate, but it is strong, and I appreciate that because after dark you can definitely read it. And there is one little final touch of color on this dial, and that is the very end of that second hand. There is a little red splash on there, which is actually not something that I immediately notice every time I look at this watch, but as I focus in on the dial, it is nice to see that little splash of color. And one of the reasons why this one is so thin is because they've gone for a flat piece of sapphire crystal, which I think is a good choice here because it does then add to that nice thinness on wrist. On the odd occasion when I'm able to break my attention away from that incredible dial or stop looking down wrist at how thin this one is, I then see that there is a mixture of polishing and brushing on that solid bezel and the case. And when I look at the case, I notice something. I notice that it reminds me of other San Martin watches that I've had. I feel with the ones that I've tried from San Martin, which is quite a few, is that they have a particular type of case or a style of case, and this one does reflect that as well. I'm not saying it's a repeat or a reuse from another watch, but it does have a San Martin flavor to it, which is not a bad thing at all. And the transitions, when you look closely at the polishing and the brushing, is just as good as you would expect. And if your expectations are low, well then you're going to be very happy when you see the quality of the brushing and the polishing on this one. And I like how they've slightly semi-recessed the crown into the case too, just a little bit. You can see that it is also signed, it is also screwed down, giving you that 100 meters of water resistance. And of course, having a high beat 9000 series Miyota, this one does have hacking and hand winding too. So after saying that the case was very reminiscent of other San Martin watches, one thing I can say that is not reminiscent of other San Martin watches is this bracelet. They may then start using this one on other models, but at this point, as far as I'm aware, it was made for this particular watch, and it is absolutely incredible. It is solid end links, solid links, screw pins used. It has a mixture of polishing and brushing, but none of that matters. It is the tolerances between the links and how this one has been put together that stands out to me. The tolerances are so close that I almost think that it might be a bracelet that can't bend, but there's actually plenty of articulation with this one. There's also a little bit of up and down on that bracelet as you look down on it, which makes it really interesting. This is probably one of the best bracelets that I've seen on a watch under $2,000, under $3,000, and I like the design of it. It's nice to have something slightly different too, and I think it suits this watch really well. In fact, I think it really does lift the watch from being a great watch to being a very great watch. Is that a word? I don't know. I think this watch is absolutely fantastic. I think this bracelet is fantastic, and I'm then very happy to see that they're using a new style of clasp. It feels like something a little bit better than their last on-the-fly adjustment version of a clasp. It's a little bit thinner, it's a little bit more refined, and it fits in well with this watch. And this is something that I'm going to say about this watch as a very big positive, because it doesn't always relate to other watches that come out of China or that are sold on Aliexpress. It is a watch that all the elements fit together. It is a cohesive unit. Even when you look through at that case back, it fits in the style of the watch. It fits the idea of the watch. It fits in with the dial of this watch. It is not something that perhaps has a good bracelet or a good clasp or a good dial or a nice case or a good movement. It's all of these things together, melded together to create a unit that just presents well and that I enjoy wearing. And as I sit here and I look at this watch and I think about that mental financial hurdle that I have to put towards a watch that is from AliExpress, those thoughts disappear. Because when I think of what other watches could I get for this money from a known brand, not one of them would be as good as this. Not one of them would be close as good as this. If this was a known name brand watch, something that was sort of a big mainstream brand or even a really well-known micro brand, this would be a lot more money. If this was a micro brand watch that you knew, the micro brand, I think this would be somewhere between $800 and $1,000. If this was a big name brand watch, I think it would be somewhere between $1,200 and $2,000. That's how this watch feels, that's how this watch presents, and that's why I remain thinking that this is the best watch release from 2024 on AliExpress. Thanks very much for watching. Maybe watch one of these videos next.